Israeli Prime Minister visited Netanyahu to accept the Gaza deal, and what will be your message to the Knesset when you speak to them?
Well, he wanted it. It's been a long time. He's been fighting a long time. He's been fighting hard. He wanted it. It's a great deal for Israel, but it's a great deal for everybody, for Arabs, for Muslims, for everybody, for the world. And as you know, on Monday the hostages come back. They're getting them now. They're getting them now. They're in some pretty rough places under earth. They're in some pretty rough places where only a few people know where they are, in some cases. So they're getting them, and they're also getting the bodies, approximately 28 bodies. And some of those bodies are being unearthed right now as we speak. They're working on it right now as we speak. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. No, he was very happy with it. And I can tell you that I saw Israel dancing in the streets, but they were dancing in Qatar and Saudi Arabia and UAE and many, many countries. I saw Egypt. They were dancing. I'll be going to Israel. I'll be speaking at the Knesset, I think, early on. And then I'm also going to Egypt. They were terrific. But all of the countries were great. Indonesia was great. Jordan was great. They were all great. Everybody wants this deal to happen.
Displaced Palestinians like 73-year-old Ramzi Tafesh continued their journey back to the ruins of their abandoned homes in northern Gaza on Saturday, a day after a ceasefire agreement with Israel took effect. We are tired, really tired, he told Reuters. Thank God we are going back to Gaza City. And God help us, we hope things will be good in the city and we find a corner to live in. Thousands of Gazans started to trek north along the coastal road overlooking sandy beaches towards Gaza City on Friday. That was after Israeli troops began pulling back under the first phase of an agreement to end the war. But even as the displaced headed home, questions remained about whether the ceasefire would lead to lasting peace. The first phase of US President Donald Trump's plan to halt the conflict between Israel and the Hamas militant group gives Israeli troops 24 hours to pull out of their positions in urban areas, but they will still hold more than half of Gaza. Hamas then has 72 hours to release 20 living Israeli hostages it's still holding. Israel will free 250 Palestinians serving long terms in its prisons and 1,700 detainees captured during the war. Hundreds of trucks per day are now expected to surge into Gaza, carrying food and medical aid. President Trump is due to head to the Middle East and to address Israel's parliament in coming days.
French President Emmanuel Macron pulled Sébastien Lecornu back into the office of Prime Minister on Friday, naming him again just days after Lecornu quit the job. Macron is still hoping the loyalist can secure enough support in a fractured parliament to pass a 2026 budget. Lecornu now faces the challenge of handing in that budget to Parliament by Monday. In reappointing Lecornu, Macron risks the wrath of his rivals, who say the best way out of France's turmoil is for Macron to either hold snap elections or resign. To shore up support for Lecornu, Macron gathered mainstream leaders hours before announcing he'd name him again. Leftist leader Olivier Faure was dismayed the next PM wouldn't be from his side of the aisle.
We don't want chaos. We don't seek dissolution at all costs, but we're not afraid of it either. And so, if the President of the Republic and his Prime Minister choose not to listen, then we have no reason to bow to their wishes.
That response suggested France's next government may be just as fragile as the last one. Another collapsed government would raise the likelihood of Macron calling a snap election, a scenario seen benefiting France's far-right party the most. The country's political crisis was in large part triggered last year when Macron decided to hold a legislative election and ended up with a three-way ideological split in parliament. France's push to get its finances in order has only deepened the divide and intensified maneuvering by political leaders seeking to succeed Macron in the 2027 presidential election. The instability in France has already stymied growth and led to threats of a downgrade to the country's credit rating.
The US is stepping up pressure on Chinese airlines, proposing a ban on their use of Russian airspace for flights to and from America. The move, announced Thursday by the Transportation Department, aims to level the playing field. Chinese carriers currently fly over Russia, indicated here in red, cutting travel time and fuel costs. US airlines have to take a longer path around Russia to reach the same destination, highlighted in blue. American carriers say that gives the Chinese airlines an unfair edge. The Transportation Department calls it a significant competitive factor and wants it stopped, though the new proposal exempts cargo-only flights. Chinese airlines have just 2 days to respond to the proposed order. A final order, which could take effect as early as November, might impact Chinese carriers like Air China and China Eastern, but it wasn't clear if Hong Kong-based Cathay Pacific would be affected. Russia has blocked US airlines from its skies since 2022, a tit-for-tat response after Washington banned Russian flights over the US after the invasion of Ukraine. The new proposal comes amid rising tensions between Washington and Beijing over economic issues. Thursday also saw China impose stricter controls on its exports of rare earth minerals, which are critical to many US firms. Such issues are likely to be in focus at the end of October, when President Trump and Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping are expected to meet face-to-face in South Korea. Last year, the Transportation Department said Chinese airlines could boost weekly round-trip US flights to 50, but that was criticized by US airlines, who said flying over Russia gave Chinese rivals an unfair advantage. More than 150 weekly round-trip passenger flights were allowed by each side before restrictions were imposed in early 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
You will be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for 2025.
Oh my God.
So the warmest congratulations to you, Maria.
The emotional moment Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who lives in hiding, was told she would win the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize on Friday.
I have no words.
But in Washington, a different sentiment. The White House has criticized Machado's award, which came just days after US President Donald Trump announced a breakthrough in talks to halt fighting in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. Spokesperson Stephen Chung complained in a post on X that the Nobel Committee proved they place politics over peace. 58-year-old Machado was blocked in 2024 by Venezuela's courts from running for president and thus challenging President Nicolás Maduro.
She is receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for her tireless work promoting democratic rights for the people of Venezuela and for her struggle to achieve a just and peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy.
Maduro was sworn in for a third term in January this year. That's despite a 6-month-long election dispute, international calls for him to stand aside, and an increase in the US reward offered for his capture. Machado is the first Venezuelan to win the Nobel Peace Prize and the 6th from Latin America.
In Zaporizhia on Friday, firefighters worked to extinguish the flames of a Russian drone strike that killed a young boy. It's an attack that has heaped further misery on 7-year-old Makar's family. His father, Hryhorij Dorosha, is a Ukrainian soldier who spent 3 years in captivity. Neighbour Nina was at the site as a rescue team searched the rubble.
They took the boy to the ambulance and tried to resuscitate him.
Сказали, пульс є.
They said he had a pulse and that they were taking him to intensive care.
Тоді сообщили, що
Later on, they called to say the boy had passed away.
це
Makar's aunt Alina said Dorosha was one of those defending Mariupol's Azovstal steel plant and had only returned to the family in March this year. Dorosha sustained a leg wound in this strike and remains in hospital. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia used over 450 drones and 30 missiles in a countrywide attack targeting the energy sector on Friday. Russia said its overnight strikes were in response to Ukraine's attacks on Russian civilian facilities. Kyiv said it wants to force Moscow, which started the war, to negotiate a peace deal in good faith.
China dramatically expanded its rare earths export controls on Thursday ahead of talks between Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. The world's largest rare earths producer added 5 new elements to its list of restricted rare earth exports. Beijing also added dozens of pieces of refining technology to its control list, while announcing rules that will require compliance from foreign rare earth producers who use Chinese materials. The Ministry of Commerce also announced extra scrutiny for semiconductor users, saying defense users will not be granted licenses, while applications related to advanced semiconductors will be approved on a case-by-case basis. The slew of new restrictions follows calls by U.S. lawmakers earlier this week for broader bans on the export of chip-making equipment to China. And Beijing's regulations mimic rules the U.S. has implemented to restrict other countries' exports of semiconductor-related products to China. They also expand controls Beijing announced in April that caused shortages around the world before a series of deals with Europe and the U.S. eased the supply crunch. The new curbs will take effect on November 8th, just before a 90-day trade truce with Washington expires. Their announcement comes ahead of a scheduled face-to-face meeting between Trump and Xi in South Korea at the end of the month. Founder of Singapore-based Edge Research Tim Jong said Thursday's move increases Beijing's leverage ahead of the meeting.